For every great game that releases, there's an equal and opposite chance of its sequel being a bust. It's not something that developers can always control. Sometimes the focus changes. Sometimes there's greater importance on trying something rather than expanding on what works. And sometimes it's just about lazy cash grabs. Let's take a look at 15 of the most disappointing sequels, whether it was games that failed to live up to their predecessors or were just terrible follow-ups overall. Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Yes, it's only just released, but Ghost Recon Breakpoint already feels inferior to Wildlands, forget living up to the OG Ghost Recon name. Along with shoehorning looter-shooter mechanics and social space elements, the overall environmental design feels samey with repetitive missions and sandbox elements. As for the writing, well, the less said the better. Ubisoft could very well fix everything in the coming year, including all the bugs, but they've certainly got their work cut out. Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 didn't just veer further away from the survival horror that defined the series, it was straight up a third-person shooter at this point. Poorly paced, with terrible plots, far too much padding, and some odd gameplay, the entire experience had questionable design elements. Cover shooting is a thing, but so are limited bullets. Meleeing enemies is a thing, but it chucks away too much stamina. Even if Resident Evil 5 wasn't the greatest sequel, Resident Evil 6 is so much more inferior that it's amazing. Dead Space 3. As EA's attempt to appeal to the mainstream, Dead Space 3 emphasized action and co-op over psychological horror. This isn't to say that the game didn't have its creepy plots and motifs, but it was nowhere near as compelling, inventive, original, or, well, scary as the previous two games. And of course, microtransactions. Who could forget the microtransactions? Certainly not EA. Mass Effect Andromeda. This heavily anticipated follow-up wasn't made by the A-Team at BioWare Edmonton, the same self-proclaimed A-Team behind Anthem, but by BioWare Montreal. As such, Mass Effect Andromeda was plagued by lack of resources, lack of a clear vision, engine issues, and more. Still, it was a disappointment, featuring poor characterization and weak writing to go along with lukewarm story and conflict. While not outright terrible, the amount of wasted potential and bugs outweighed positive aspects like the combat. Star Wars Battlefront 2, 2017. On paper, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was exactly the sequel that we all wanted. A campaign, more feature-packed multiplayer, space battles, no season pass, free post-launch content. This all quickly fell apart with the Star Card system, which was pay to win but also inherently confusing and stacked against anyone playing the game normally. Of course, the underwhelming story mode, coupled with numerous bugs and issues, did no favors for the game at launch. Thankfully, it has improved a great deal since then. Crackdown 3. If you went into Crackdown 3 expecting a huge open world where you could just blow things up, then you were probably still disappointed. Touted as the next big step in cloud-based destruction, Crackdown 3 could barely deliver on this premise in multiplayer. Single-player was no better, plagued with archaic design choices, one-note gameplay, and bugs galore. Even the vaunted Terry Crews could not save this experience. Destiny 2. From a brooding dark fantasy to a hip MCU-aping adventure, Destiny 2 was an utter joke at launch. The great gunplay had been watered down by slow movement and nerfed abilities, to say nothing of the restrictive double primary system. Beloved characters were turned into poorly written caricatures, constantly trying to be clever or funny and failing spectacularly at both. The endgame was non-existent, the focus on microtransactions was absurd, and above all else, Destiny 2 just wasn't fun. It has improved massively since launch, but it has taken a while to get there. Duke Nukem Forever. Some games that are in development for years have the benefit of releasing with a level of quality that ranges from underwhelming to fantastic. Duke Nukem Forever started development in 1997, released in 2011, and managed to be unequivocally terrible. We could go on about the bad levels, technical issues, loading times, multiplayer, dreadful gameplay, and straight-up boring design, but honestly, one look at the game is all you need to know that it is a travesty. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. It's not like the Tony Hawk games had anything going for it prior to this release, but it was obvious from the get-go that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was a hastily assembled mess meant to squeeze whatever remaining goodwill the fanbase had before the license expired. Forget the heaps of bugs and glitches. Everything was terrible. Too much loading, a lackluster trick system, bad controls, frame rate drops, repetitive objectives. This game is a blueprint for how not to make a video game, let alone a Tony Hawk sequel. Dead Rising 4. Though personally not a fan of Dead Rising 3, it was still better than whatever Dead Rising 4 was trying to go for. Sure, Frank West returned, but the story, along with the visuals and action, felt tired. Missions felt uninspired. The combat was terrible, even going by pure nostalgia. It just couldn't deliver. For one of the more heavily touted console exclusives for Xbox One at the time before its inevitable release for PS4, Dead Rising 4 aspired to mediocrity at best. Assassin's Creed Unity. It's bad enough that Assassin's Creed Unity launched in such a poor technical state, with its missing face textures and bugs becoming the memes of legend. But it was a major step down from Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, and not just from the lack of sailing. Co-op was badly implemented, the missions felt tedious, the story was forgettable, and to top it off, Ubisoft couldn't resist pushing its microtransactions. Such was the backlash that the company had to issue an official apology. Star Wars: The Force Unleashed 2. The first game was an interesting experiment, offering some great action with some questionable set pieces, poor boss battles, and weird camera issues. But The Force Unleashed 2 seemed intent on doing worse, somehow. It gave you 2 lightsabers and made combat more insane. That's good. It also turned Starkiller into an annoying Gary Stu and force-pushed the plot out the window. That's bad. Coupled with some repetitive levels and lack of any real direction, The Force Unleashed 2 felt more arbitrary than deserved. Thief 2014. Eidos Montreal had it rough with Thief, a reboot that was originally meant as a sequel to the classic trilogy. And while it did have some good moments, everything that made Thief so compelling, from the weapons and terrible AI to the environmental design and storytelling, felt several steps behind its predecessors. Given development woes and shifting visions, it could have been a lot worse. Ninja Gaiden 3. The first Ninja Gaiden not directed by creator Tomonobu Itagaki, Ninja Gaiden 3 was poor to say the least. Ryu Hayabusa, murderer of many throughout the years, was suddenly repentant and decided to murder more dudes to atone or something. The combo system had been neutered, and quick-time events were sprinkled throughout the game with abandon. Even the excellent controls of previous games felt stiff and unenjoyable here. It's amazing to think that Ninja Gaiden could be ruined, and yet Team Ninja pulled it off. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. What do fans want from a beloved platforming franchise? Do they want the exact same action but with better visuals, new levels, and some new mechanics on top of the same lovable gameplay loop? Hell no, they want vehicles, building, and less platforming, which is fine if you truly want to take a different approach, but this was hampered by poor vehicle controls and a relatively dreary sandbox. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.